I am your host for tonight, Mary Jane Calderon, joining you from my home in Fort Wright, Kentucky. Also joining me by Zoom is our presenter for this evening, Jeannine Kreinbrink, and my assistant for this evening, BCM Service Associate Heather Cook. So thank you both for being here. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's history museum, that would not be possible without support. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. Now, let's learn a little bit about tonight's presenter. Jeannine Kreinbrink is the president and senior partner at K&V Cultural Resources Management, which she co-founded in 2011. She has combined a career in cultural resource management with conducting educational and public programs in archaeology, preservation, and history. Her career in archaeology began at NKU, volunteering at BCM, where she has been archaeologist in 1986, working on urban archaeology in Covington. Jeannine obtained her master's in 1992 from UC and has worked as a professional archaeologist ever since. She serves on the board of directors for the Friends of Big Bone. She helped found and served on the board of the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum, and also taught as an adjunct professor for the anthropology and history departments at NKU from 1997 to 2014. Welcome back, Jeannine. Now, a reminder before we get started, we love participation from our viewers, so we want your questions. Please type any questions or comments you have in the chat or the Q&A feature, and I will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. Now it is trivia time. So tonight's question is, what major historical resource provided important clues about Constant's station? So go ahead and type those answers in the chat, and we will announce the winner at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. Jeannine, I will now turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to turn my video off and I'm going to share my screen. So this talk tonight is about a place called Constant Station, kind of a lost station. We'll talk about why that is in Clark County, Kentucky, right by Winchester, Kentucky, and that's east of Lexington. I conducted this project in the early 2000s for the Winchester Industrial Authority. And trivia question, which says Tricia at the bottom, but trivia question, what major historical resource provided important clues about Constant Station? And we will talk about that. All right, are you seeing the second slide? The map?
Yes.
Yay, okay. I don't know why it's not working. All right, so if you want a bigger picture for the listeners on the Ohio Valley and what was happening in the 1700s, say 1770s, 1780s, during the Revolutionary War, Jason French's excellent presentation to this group called The Revolution on the Ohio is on YouTube, and that will give you some bigger picture. And I'm going to read about John and Abigail Constant and what happened to them and their settlement in Clark County. And first, we're going to do a little bit of historical background. So I have a copy of Filson's map with some blue arrows on it there. And then we'll talk about the archaeology. And every once in a while, we'll try to make this a real slideshow again. So initial explorations by Daniel Boone, Christopher Gist, Walker, and others took place over 30 years in the mid-18th century. None, however, stayed to set up settlements during this earlier period. Most felt that the dangers from the Shawnee, Cherokee, and other native tribes were still too great in the Kentucky region. After 1770, reports from explorers began to motivate those who sought settlement west of the Allegheny Mountains. Kentucky had not produced any evidence of gold or other commercially viable resources as yet, but explorers did report good prospective croplands. The first permanent settlements included Fort Herod Boonesborough, and Logan Station, or St. Asaph's, all laid out in 1775. In 1775, Harrison and Clotter, Kentucky History Report, notes that there were no more than 150 persons occupying Boonesborough. A later author puts the entire non-native population of Kentucky at about 150 in the same year. I don't know if you can see my little arrow moving around, but this is Lexington, or what becomes Lexington. This is Boonesborough, and my arrow has moved, but this is the area that we're going to be talking about right there. It's kind of tiny right now, but we'll zoom in a little. Henderson and Boone had originally claimed Boonesborough as a Transylvania colony under George III. They set up a parliament and gave out land. The land had not been, quote unquote, bought from the Cherokee, who knew they did not hold title to it. This part of Kentucky had been previously ceded to the English government by the Six Nations, that include the Iroquois Confederation, and was included in the Virginia Charter. In 1778, Virginia declared the acts of the company null and void, but compensated them anyway. During the late 1770s, other pioneers started setting up small stations or fortified settlements, especially in the Kentucky River and Licking River drainages. By 1776 or after, three kinds of land claims existed in Kentucky. These were claims based on military service, claims taken out under Transylvania through Boone and Henderson, and many land claims that were made without any warrant or title whatsoever. People would essentially squat on land and claim it as theirs. The Jackson Purchase, which is west, was the only part of Kentucky that was surveyed prior to distribution of land grants. Otherwise, confusing and overlapping grants was a normal situation across the rest of the Commonwealth. These grants were often surveyed by inexperienced or illiterate surveyors. They were not laid out in any form of grid, but generally in a haphazard manner. In 1776, the Virginia Convention passed a resolution that all men then actually settled in Kentucky should be given preference. They followed that up with a resolution that gave any man already controlling land 400 acres as a settlement right and 1,000 acres as a preemption, which means laying claim. A cabin had to be erected on the land to get the preemption. 1779, Virginia set up a land office in Boonesborough to sell these land warrants. They also gave soldiers with military experience land warrants. Clark's campaigns in the late 1700s gave, or 1778, 1779, gave a feeling of more security to the immigrants into Kentucky. A surge began after this. The year 1780 saw heavy immigration into Kentucky, perhaps because of the turmoil created by the Revolutionary War. At least 3,000 people rode flatboats to Louisville in that year. Estimated population of Kentucky by 1783 was 12,000. By 1784, it was up to 30,000. Most of these early pioneers came from Virginia, with some from Pennsylvania and others from North Carolina. The vast majority of them were native-born in the American colonies. British and Native American General Clark and his militia fought a series of engagements in the early 1780s. As we will talk about below, John Constant was involved in some of that activity. The year 1781 was relatively quiet in terms of Native American attacks. English influenced Native American tribes under their patronage. Shawnee, Mingo, Delaware, Wyandot, and Potawatomi began to make a concerted effort in 1782 to attack forts and stations in Kentucky. Because of this, immigration slowed down, but then picked back up again. 1782 was the worst for incursions by Native Americans. These included attacks at Estill Station, Upper Blue Licks or Holder's Defeat, Bryan Station, Blue Licks again, Strode Station, and so on. News of the treaty between Great Britain and the U.S. reached Kentucky in early 1783. This helped calm the situation and largely ended the bigger conflicts. However, beginning in 1783, the Native Americans in small bands moved in and out of Kentucky. Although land speculators kept the rumors of Indian attacks alive to keep the land prices down, small raids did continue for a number of years, with 1785, 1786 being particularly troublesome. And as we'll see, 1785 is relevant for us. There's another map showing Harrodsburg, St. Asaph, and the upper right arrow is pointing to a place called Strode Station, which will become very relevant here shortly. Strode Station is on Strode Creek, which flows north into one of the branches of the Licking River. This is a drawing of Strode Station showing the locations of the different landholders, and there's an arrow pointing to John Constant's house in Strode Station. John Strode came to Kentucky in April 1776. By 1779, when he received his preemption for 1,000 acres, he and other settlers built a stockaded station. This soon became the largest fortified settlement in the local area, and he named it after himself. This network of defensible residential stations was interspersed among the larger forts, such as Boonesborough. Forts are communally occupied stockaded enclosures, provided a place of public sanctuary. People often lived outside of them, but could retreat inside. A station may be defined as a defensible domestic residential site. They were privately owned and controlled, as opposed to being a community effort. Most of the families in stations were frequently related by blood, marriage, or friendship, such as the case at Strode Station, where most of the inhabitants were either related or came from the same several counties in Virginia. One researcher found that 80% of the Strode Station's inhabitants had some relative there. All of this provided a support system among the groups. Captain John Constant, he and his wife Abigail are the subject of our talk today. John Constant was the son of John Constant Sr., who moved his family from Yvelines, France to Maryland around 1730. From this oldest known beginning, the Constant family migrated to Hampshire County, Virginia, which is now part of West Virginia, actually, where John Constant Jr., we'll call him Captain John Constant, from now on, was probably born. Don't have a lot of information on his early life. Ancestry.com says that John and Abigail married circa 1775 in Virginia, and they migrated into Kentucky certainly by 1777. The first record of Captain John Constant in Kentucky shows up in 1779. He's listed as a member of Captain John Holder's company on June 10, 1779, located at or near Boonesborough. He also appears as a lot holder at Boonesborough before 1780. I cut off the top. After serving at Boonesborough, he and his family moved north to Strode Station in Clark County around 1780. While living at Strode Station between 1780 and 1783, Constant served as the ranking militia officer at Strode Station. There's a man named Isaac Clinkenbeard, whose Revolutionary War pension, and he becomes relevant here through the rest of this talk. On his pension in 1833, he described several activities that directly include John Constant and associate him with George Rogers Clark. Quote, in the fall of 1782, he enlisted with John Constant and joined Clark at the mouth of the Licking on the Ohio, same place as 2 years before. They marched through Old Chillicothe, then in ruins, to New Chillicothe on the Big Miami, and took 33 prisoners, then returned to Kentucky. He also worked with John Constant to spy between Strode Station and the Upper Blue Licks in the northern border of the settlements of Kentucky. So John Constant apparently commanded a company of Fayette County militia in 1782. Another quote, the folder at the Clark County Library called the Constant Family Folder that provided a lot of relevant information too. But Captain John Constant was on a payroll from October to November 1782. And he also was listed as having lost some horses at one of the battles at Upper Blue Lick. And there's a lot more detail on that we don't have time to go into. He got blamed for one of the defeats up at Blue Lick, and this resulted in his leaving Strode Station in 1784. John Constant had applied for one 400-acre presumption in the late 1770s, but whether he built a house on that one is not recorded. We know he was at Boonesborough and then Strode Station. January 1783, he received 2 land grants. Table lists as known land grants at this time. The one in yellow, which is 800 acres on Strode's Creek, is the relevant piece of property for us. Now we're going to go back to a map to get you reacquainted here. You can see Winchester down there. That's I-64 going east-west. There's a circle marking where Strode Station was located. There's nothing left of it, but there are pretty accurate reports of it from earlier in the 20th century. I don't know whether there were still remnants or buildings, but that's where Strode Station was. And I've got Strode's Creek marked up there. There's another branch of the creek running north from here. And so the creek is running north. So they are kind of downstream from Strode Station. And this is the location of the archaeological site that we will be talking about. They probably moved soon after the land was surveyed, and I would guess probably maybe spring, so they could clear land and plant crops. Several families reportedly accompanied John Constant to his new station. Various informants agree that Stamper family and Parvin family moved with them, possibly others off and on. Henry Parvin, who was a child in mid-1780s, becomes very important. Oral history accounts about Constant Station appear in the Draper manuscripts. This collection is known as the Draper Collection and consists of 491 volumes of manuscripts, papers, and books collected by Lyman Copeland Draper about the history of the Trans-Allegheny West. This includes, of course, Kentucky. Draper went around interviewing pretty much every elderly person he could find in the early 1800s and talking to them about their journeys, about what they saw, who they knew, their activities, and collected papers and books associated with that. We'll come back to that information at the end. Several accounts in the Draper manuscripts talk about Constant Station. And here are 2 drawings from the Draper manuscripts, and one at the top is by a man named William Clinkenbeard. So there's Clinkenbeards, they're all related, show up here off and on, and then Henry Parvin at the time. Now remember, these drawings were made in the early 1800s, so we're talking, say, 40 years after the fact, and they are remembering things. So the descriptions of the station layout vary slightly. Clinkenbeard at the top, his is really pretty rough. It's got a little square showing where they lived. A lot of the rest of it doesn't make a lot of sense. Drawing at the bottom is Henry Parvin's drawing, and you'll see there are 3 little squares, and those represent houses, with this one being marked as Constant's house. Fields, here, more fields, and then that way to Strode Station. And then he talks about a yard fence around it. So Klinkenbeard was an adult in the 1780s and lived with Constant for a short time in the later 1780s, but he was at Strode Station. So what happened, and I don't have a date, they say, 1785, but nobody says, June 10th or October 5th, or there's no actual date. But in 1785, the station was attacked by a small contingent, apparently, of Native Americans. We don't know who they were or what tribe. John Constant was supposedly wounded. Several small children were possibly killed. They were not John and Abigail Constant's children. They might have been Parvin children, but that gets a little iffy. They also described that the buildings were built in a quadrangle, or at least clustered tightly together. And Parvin was a child who was actually involved in the attack. And Klinkenbeard says, when the children were killed, there were only 3 families lived there: Constant, Parvin, and Stamper. Constant was out in his, and Stamper in his cornfield plowing. Some of the other children had the measles, and 2 had been sent to the mouth of the lane, 120 or 30 yards from the house, to break some spice bushes. And these were the 2 children who were supposedly killed. Mrs. Constant ran to the door to see, and a bullet struck the cheek of the door or the end of the log right at the end of the door. I saw the bullet hole many a time. Old Daddy Stamper heard the noise and got in, and presumably into a house. Constant might also have gotten in without hurt, but he couldn't get 2 other of Parvin's children that were with him in the field to take the alarm and run. The house was a new log house on uneven ground and had not been underpinned all along. Constant came along the lower side of the house, and his wife took up a puncheon and led him up from under the floor. Puncheon is a rough floorboard. A few important points are summarized here. So Constant's house was not underpinned. That means it did not have a continuous foundation. So it would have been on corner piers. So he could crawl under the house and up through the floor. The house was built on uneven ground. The interview mentions a yard fence and a gate. And in another place I don't have quoted here, it mentions hemp and cornfields. So we'll come back to all that when we get to the archaeology. Parvin describes the manor very similarly to Klinkenbeard, and he drew this more detailed sketch that you can see here. And we'll come back to this sketch because the layout of the 3 buildings becomes very relevant. All right, let's do a little bit of family stuff here, and we'll get to the archaeology here real quick. John Constant died in 1788, very quickly, and we'll get to that in a minute, of an unknown illness. Their first child was born while they were in Virginia. Second child, John, is listed as being born in Kentucky, although that quote skips Abigail, who allegedly was the second child. So Thomas, Abigail, John, the third, Jacob, and Isaac. There was at least one daughter who died as a child. After the Native American attack at some point in 1785, they appeared to have moved back to Strode Station for a short period of time, but soon made their way back to their property at the site. Strode Station apparently actually broke up in 1787 with people going all out to their own land. They stayed there, and he died there on October 10th, 1788. John Constant's will was probated in what was then Bourbon County, now Clark County, in Book A, pages 11 and 12. A man named Van Swearingen and Isaac Constant, who was Captain John's brother, witnessed the will as it was dictated. This is called a non-cooperative will. Constant was ill with an acute sickness. His exact illness is not known. The will was dictated on October 1st and he died on October 10th at his home. They both swore that the will was valid, even though Constant was too ill to sign it. The will left everything to his children in care of his wife Abigail, but does not individually name the children. This may be because she was pregnant with their last child, Isaac, who would not be born until the following April. So Abigail was left a widow with 5 children under 12 and 1 on the way. They stayed on the farm and continued to live there until they sold the property in the late 1820s, and we will come back to that. So where was Constant stationed? Well, I've got an arrow pointing to it now, but many references speculate on the location of Constant Station in relation to Strode Station and other local Winchester landmarks. I got a whole list of them because nobody knew where it was because it was abandoned so early, like in the 1820s. There's a wonderful book called Stockading Up. If you've never read it, Nancy O'Malley from the University of Kentucky wrote it, and it's all about stockades in Kentucky. She gathered some of these descriptions. So it says Constance Creek, or on which they live, was named for them, and this is the little stream that drains the present-day city of Winchester, and that's this right here. This Winchester's literally right there. He left Strode Station, established his own a half-mile downstream on Strode's Creek. They talked about calling it the Constant Community in the early 19th century. It stood in the valley about a mile below Strode Station. Early fortified habitation was within 3/4 of a mile of Strode Station. And one more importantly for us, a man named John Hedge said that Constant Station was on the road that opened up to Maysville from Boonesborough through Strode Station and then on past Constant. Now, here's Boonesborough. Here's the road north to Strode, and here's the road to Maysville. And it runs right past our site, which is literally right there. A review of property deeds from 1811 and 1826, which are relevant. For the property on which the site is located, have both deeds referencing an old road as a boundary of the property. The deeds call it the Old Hood Road. Hood Station was supposed to be somewhere east of Constant and Strode Station by several miles, although we don't know where that one was either. So that brings us to the archaeology. So we're going to go through that here. So I did not do the phase 1 archaeology survey or the phase 2 evaluation on the site. So the phase 1 found historic artifacts and some prehistoric Native American artifacts on a hilltop. They found the historic items concentrated along the southern edge of the hill. The phase 2 excavation was conducted on the site, and they found a pit cellar, which is a small earth. It's not lined, it's just a hole in the ground that people would either put under their houses or outbuildings to store stuff in. One shallow pit, post molds and artifacts that seem to be early 19th century. Kentucky Heritage Council agreed the site contains significant historical features. Next stop, mitigation or complete or more extensive excavation. So here we'll remind again where it is. This is called Van Meter Road over here. So the phase 2, and I don't know if you can see, this is the site archaeological excavation area that we ended up excavating. I don't know if you can see the little pale lines going this way. So the phase 2 excavation did we'll get to it in a minute, 2 or 3 very long, narrow trenches across part of the site. And that's where they found the pit and some post holes. And unfortunately, the person who did the phase 2 had all their photographs were ruined, and the only drawing that they had done was a sketch drawing in a notebook, and it wasn't to scale. So when we went out, all we had was the trenches that they had dug for the phase 2. So we went out to do the field work. Here's the field crew excavating what turned out to be a stone chipping pile from creating chimneys. So we did historical research to find a detailed picture of the site within context of historic settlement and rural settlement patterns, and we did a lot of comparative research. There we go. So the first thing we did was mechanical soil removal, in which you use a piece of heavy equipment and try to do all the zone from the site. And if you look at the picture on the bottom, there's lots of little bits of blue tarp laying over. Every one of those is an archaeological feature, whether that's a pit feature or a chimney or post holes, and then just some general views of excavation in this photo. We ended up actually removing the soil from almost an acre of ground because we kept finding things, because it turned out what we were finding were boundary fences. But and the soil here was the clay was so stiff that they brought in a road grader, which is a self-loading pan, and they pushed it with a bulldozer to remove the soil because it was so heavy and dense. So this is the map. You see lots of little circles and dots with F numbers by them. F means feature. Try to point out a few that are going to be important. So there's this one and this one. Can you see my cursor going around? I guess.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Excellent. All right. So there's feature 2, feature 4. So these are the phase 2 trenches. And we remapped them as best we could because they had not been filled in. Here's a chimney base. And this is feature 1 that they had found in their trench, or part of it, and chimney base, and it turned out they had cut through it with the phase 2 trench. This is another chimney base and another chimney base, so 104 and 114. So you can see how high these feature numbers are. We had a lot of features. Some of them just turned out to be rocks. And this big square down here turned out to be part of a bank barn that had been filled in. So it's kind of like the lower part of a bank barn. So that one probably is early 1800. All right, so we have these features. This one up here, feature 14. You can see all the rows of post holes. So lots of post holes. Here's another row of post holes down here. Row of post holes. So we think these are fences from various times during the occupation. And there was probably a smaller building up here. These two are kind of interesting because these are all pit cellars. These two are pit cellars. Not sure about that one. This is all that rock and that other feature, which is just a chipping station. So we'll get to these as to why they could be out there all by themselves, because there's no chimney out there. These are the 3 chimney bases. So feature 114, 104, and feature 3, which, like I said, had been cut off. So this is a U-shaped chimney. So the firebox in this one would probably have been higher up and may have had brick in it. These are rectangular. So they just build a rectangular base, and then the firebox is here for where you actually built your fire. And obviously anything above ground is gone. So these are drawings of 2 of them. So this is the layout of the houses. So we have 2 chimneys side by side going this way. So the houses would be on this side. And this, the U-shaped chimney over here with the pit cellar that would have been under the floor. And that's feature 1. This is kind of an example of what the house, well, come back up here. I want you to go up. Well, let me go back. There we go. Okay. This is an example of what these little simple houses might have looked like from this early period. And the chimneys are called cat and clay or mud cat, where the bottom is stone, and then it might have a wood at the top, and you could push it over if it caught on fire. These are two of the shallow pit cellars. Actually, this is feature 14. It's very interesting. That's the one on the upper left by itself. It had redware, pottery sherds, and a lot of butchered deer and pig bones in it. So that may have actually been like a butchering activity area. Feature 1 was started into phase 2, and we finished it. Here's how big it turned out to be in phase 2. Here's the profile. It had early 1700s artifacts in it, pearlware, creamware. It had a scissors. It had a brass straight pin. It had a brass thimble in it. But it also had whiteware, which indicates people were still using it up into the early 1800s. Feature 4 was a shallow pit. It had a brass lock in it, an 18th century ceramics, peach pit, squash, walnut, hickory, a straight pin, a piece of silver jewelry, wrought iron nails, a latch hook, and a hinge. So only 1700s artifacts in this one, and feature 2, same way. This is the big one, very large, turned out to be from a barn. So let's go back. So we can see the stone chipping pit, the house arrangement here, 14 up by itself, that is probably an activity area. And these two interesting pit features over here with very early period artifacts, so 1770s, 1780s anyway. What they're doing out there, I never did figure out. I mean, unless there was a surface house that didn't have any lower stuff. So here's some of the artifacts. We have early stoneware. We have tin glaze, which is 1760s, 1780s. A lot of pearlware, creamware, which is also in that same time frame of artifacts. A lot of redware, including black jackfield, which is definitely 1700s. We have white salt glazed, which is also 18th century. So this one in the corner. We have gun flints, mouth harps, brass padlocks, silver jewelry, which is this one here, straight pins, early buttons, and this particular button was probably John Constant's, and it's a brass button off of a greatcoat, which is what is in these pictures. And one of the heavy equipment operators, apparently, we found out later, stayed behind at the end of the day and was going through the back dirt piles and found a second greatcoat button, but he would not give it up. We don't have time to talk about this, but all of the animals, bones that were found, domestic and wild animals, and we'll come back to that. Carbonized remains, carpetweed, mustard, squash, beans, purslane, bed straw, various nutshells. The phase 2 out of feature 1, they got corn and wheat. Constant probate inventory is interesting. We'll have time to talk about it in depth, but they were rural farmers who participated in the local economy. They grew subsistence crops, but also cash crops such as flax and hemp, which are both listed in his probate inventory. 2 spinning wheels in the inventory indicate Abigail may have pursued making cloth to help support her family. So the 18th century items include the following: a brass padlock, which is similar to other 18th century ones for like a document box or a small box, a mouth harp, the brass button, tin glazed earthenware, which is probably Delftware, white salt glazed stoneware, early other stonewares, the Jackfield redware, hand wrought nails, creamware, ceramics. They probably brought some of them with them from Virginia. You know, maybe there were traders who had come into Boonesborough if they went up to by Lexington by this point. All right, so the inventory of John Constant's estate is fairly vague on household items. It lists a lot of farm equipment, which was obviously important, but it does, as I mentioned, include 2 spinning wheels. The discovery of sewing notions in the archaeological record indicates that Abigail was processing wool and flax, which the inventory also lists 8 sheep and also flax to make cloth. She could use that to produce clothing and blankets. She may have also traded or sold the cloth to obtain money for her family. As a widow, she would have had a difficult time providing for her young children, who ranged in age from 12 down to newborn, the one who was born after the father's death. Thomas is the oldest at 12, would probably have been old enough to plow and work on the farm. They held no enslaved persons, but may have hired farm hands if they could afford it. The Constant family folder at the library in Winchester includes some anonymous biographical information that says Abigail died in 1798 or circa 1800. This is unconfirmed, and Abigail and John's burial locations are not recorded. The children began to come of age and marry starting in the late 1790s. Thomas married Margaret Edmondson, 1796. John Constant III married Margaret's sister, Susanna, 1802. Jacob married Elizabeth, 1808, and Isaac married Amy Dean in 1811, who was probably a cousin because Abigail's maiden name was Dean. No marriage record was found for Abigail, but family folder says she married a man named Dawson and lived in Clark County. By 1811, the Constant children were all of age because they set about dividing up the family property. A set of deeds breaks up the large holdings, and John Jr. ends up with the site on which the site is located. The archaeological data provides other clues to their lifestyle and how they operated on the farm. A mule and a horseshoe were recovered from the site. The probate inventory lists 2 mares and 2 work oxen. They would have used these animals and perhaps later a mule for plowing, dragging wood and other items, and pulling a wagon or cart. Butchered pig and deer show up in the archaeological features, along with chicken, rabbit, duck, and other small animals that probably served as food. Pigs, hogs, sheep, cows, calves, and a steer are listed in the inventory. The wild game suggests they supplemented their basic food choices. This includes deer, rabbit, turtle, fish, wildfowl, and other small game such as squirrels. The ratio of domestic to wild is typical of other sites that we looked at in the Kentucky region. The deer probably also provided hides for leather working. Constant's probate inventory includes several entries of rawhide and leather. Crops in the inventory include corn, wheat, rye, hemp, and flax. Hemp and flax are cash and product crops that would have provided income. The Constant family folder also indicates, and we found this in the deeds, that the Constant family left Kentucky and moved to Illinois between 1826 and 1835. John III sold the property to a man named John Clinkenbeard, who was a relative of the earlier Clinkenbeards, in 1826. Based on the artifacts, somebody likely lived there until at least the later 1830s, but no artifacts later than that time frame were found on the site. No Constant family members are found in the Clark County 1830 census. Abigail Dawson and her husband stayed in Clark County, but lived on other Constant land to the east. All of this fits neatly with the decline in artifacts found on the site. Archaeologically, it appears the site was abandoned probably by the late 1830s and was turned back into farmland. None of those features, none of the chimney bases or anything were visible on the ground surface when the initial surveys were done. The Constant Station is a good example of an early station site that continued to be occupied by the original occupants, at least up into the early 1800s. Forgotten sites provided important information on early Kentucky rural settlement in the 18th century. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeannine. We were getting a little bit of static there at the end with your microphone. I don't know, is your cell phone next to your computer by any chance?
Nope.
I don't know what it was. It was just causing a little static, but we could hear you. But you did a great job. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Heather, let me go ahead and turn back on my camera. So Heather, did we have a winner for the trivia question? Heather, you're still muted.
We had one guess, which was extremely close, and I think I'll give it to him. And that was Dave Pauly. The question was, what major historical resource provided important clues about Constant Station? The answer was Draper manuscripts. He said Draper collection, which is close enough, I think. So congratulations, yes. Dave. You'll be getting your prize in the mail.
Good job, Dave. All right, Jeannine, you want to stop sharing your screen? Maybe
that's
turn on
another word for it.
So we could see your lovely face here as we wrap up.
All right.
And then I did think that I saw a question or comment. Is that correct?
We did have a question. And so Donna was asking, where are items that are found kept at?
All of the artifacts from this site are curated at the Webb Museum at the University of Kentucky.
Okay.
Okay. Was there anything you wanted to add, Jeannine, about I know you briefly went over the screen that showed some of the animals and things that were found.
Oh, we kind of talked about it at the end. Oh, I did want to talk about briefly the Draper manuscripts. So as I had mentioned briefly, he went around interviewing as many very old people as he could in the early 1800s and collecting all of this stuff. 491 volumes, and he's from Wisconsin, or that's where he ended up. So the Wisconsin Historical Society has all of that, the entire collection, and it could also be called the Draper collection at Wisconsin. 491 volumes divided into 50 series of varying lengths. Each series is titled by a geographic area, subject, or the name of a prominent frontier leader. Even as of today, a single detailed and comprehensive index does not exist. However, there are partial indexes to some of the Draper series. Family Search has some of those indexes so that you can search them, if you want to see if an early name shows up. Or I guess you can go to Wisconsin. People have been trying to get some of it online. It's just so much information. I'm sure lots of untapped, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, everything that whenever you do your presentations, everything that can be found from, from archaeological digs, the stories that you can unravel.
So much fun. This was one of my favorite sites.
Okay, let's see. Is there something in the Q&A as well? Oh, does the china indicate the family's wealth or social status is what's
good question. Yes, because we did find like the jackfield redware and the fancier decorated ceramics indicates that either before they left Virginia, a lot of that probably came with them. packed in sawdust or whatever, on the wagon or whatever. But yes, so they certainly had enough money to buy nice things. And there's a piece of silver from probably a piece of jewelry. They had apparently a cash box. They had books in the probate inventory, which definitely would indicate education, and some access to be able to buy things. And certainly the fact that he operated as a captain, he was an officer. He wasn't just an enlisted person. So yes, thank you. Good question.
All right, and I think that might be all of our questions that I'm seeing. So thank you, Jeannine, so much for another wonderful
You're very
presentation.
welcome.
Wonderful Northern Kentucky History Hour. If you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen, then we can
Oh,
go
I
ahead
thought I
and
was.
Heather will be pulling up our screen. So there will not be a Northern Kentucky History Hour for the months of December and January, but we will return next year on February 10th. Although if you do have a topic you would like to see on the program, you can still email me, Mary Jane, at communications@bcmuseum.org. I would love to hear your ideas. For more Northern Kentucky history throughout the week, check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest Curators Chat, along with all of our past Northern Kentucky History Hour presentations. Please like and subscribe. That's all we have time for this evening. Thank you again for all of the sponsors and supporters of BCM. Until next time, take care, everyone. And I wish everyone a very happy and safe holiday season. So good night. And thanks, Jeannine. Thanks, Heather.